Representative Howard, I will move House File 3480 be before the committee and be re-referred to Ways and Means.
Thank you,
Please
Chair.
discuss your bill.
Thank you, Chair Cleveland, Chair Nash. I'm glad to be back in state government.
Well, I understand you have an author's amendment. Would
I
you
do
like
have
to
an
discuss
author's
the
amendment.
amendment?
Yes.
I will move the A2 be before the committee.
The author's amendment gets the bill in the shape I would prefer. It fills in a dollar amount for the study and adds some clarifying language around timing around the study.
Thank you for taking care of the fiscal portion of this bill. Members, is there any discussion to the A2? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the A2, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The amendment is adopted. Now to your bill as amended, please.
Thank you, Chair Cleveland. House File 3480 is frankly a very straightforward and simple bill, which calls for an independent economic impact study of the impacts statewide of Operation Metro Surge. No matter your feelings about what has occurred during Operation Metro Surge, I would hope we could have some shared understanding that this was an unprecedented event that occurred in the state of Minnesota that did impact our citizens. Again, no matter what your inclinations are about what has occurred over the past many months related to Operation Metro Surge. So what this bill seeks to do is what we should always be doing in this legislature, which is to be curious and ask questions and get hard data to inform our legislative policymaking to best advocate for our constituents all across the state. We do have a bevy of anecdotal evidence and the beginnings and pieces of study to show significant economic harm related to Operation Metro Surge. A study by the North Star Prosperity Project is estimating hundreds of millions of dollars in lost wages. We're seeing hundreds of small businesses that have had to close or significantly reduce operations. We've had entire sectors turned on its head, from the agriculture economy to housing and construction and many others. Childcare has been a sector of our economy that's been incredibly damaged. A study showed that nearly 30% of childcare centers had to close or reduce operations due to either families not able to visit or actual threats from ICE, as we've seen them target childcare centers. Our schools have seen economic impacts, of course, as a result. Our local governments have experienced millions of dollars in additional unforeseen costs, in particular in local law enforcement costs. And what was raised earlier about the sort of where this has taken place. The reality is there's been reported economic impacts all across the state, including Moorhead, Faribault, Wilmer, Albert Lee, Alexandria, Grand Rapids, and the list goes on and on. The operation, although the title of it was Operation Metro Surge, this was really a surge that affected all of their state, and we should try to learn more information. I'm going to have a few testifiers to share more information and studies, but I wanted to, it's in your packet, I wanted to highlight one specific letter that was sent to you all by someone from Wilmer. His name was Christopher Gomez, and he lives in Wilmer, where his family owns El Tapadio, a restaurant. This past January, 2 ICE agents off duty entered the restaurant, and everyone felt pretty intense about that. Christopher went to his father, who owns the restaurant, and asked what they should do, and his father said, "We should serve them. They're patrons in our restaurant." A few hours later, as the restaurant closed, ICE agents descended upon the owner and father and mother of this restaurant. If folks hadn't been on the scene, the car would have been left in the middle of the street. Both the mother and father were detained. In just a few days, they were sent to Texas. The father was able to return home. His mother was deported. The revenue alone of the loss of these restaurants totals thousands of dollars, and now this family is trying to figure out how to recover. That's just one of thousands of stories all across the state. This occurred in Wilmer. And I wanted to highlight the testimony of Christopher as well. And with that, I would welcome my testifiers.
Thank you very much. We have two testifiers who have signed up to testify. I have Laura Santiago, followed by Rachel Sayre. Please, if you'll join us at the table, state your name for the record, please, and begin your testimony. Ms. Santiago.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. I am Laura Santiago. I will be reading here on behalf of Christopher Gomez. Chair Claiborne and members of committee, hello, my name is Christopher Gomez. I live in Wilmer, Minnesota, where my family owns and runs El Tapatío. I am testifying in support of HF 3480. This past January, 2 tables of ICE agents came into a restaurant without uniforms. Various community members confirmed those were agents as their vehicles sat outside. When the agents were inside our business, we felt like we were under surveillance. I told my dad right away, and he responded, "They're off duty. What can we do? Just serve them." So we did. I left the restaurant at 3 p.m. that night. My parents stayed behind to close the restaurant at 8:30 p.m. That's when the worst happened. As soon as they left, ICE followed my parents for a block or two. They were detained near church by a middle school. My mom was able to call us when it happened, and my sister and I showed up. If we had not come, ICE would have left my dad's truck running in the middle of the street. They handed his keys to a woman nearby, and they left everything there. Children's car seats were left in the back. My mom's purse was still inside. They just took my parents and left everything behind. In just a few days, my parents were transported to a detention facility in Texas. Another month later, my dad was released, but my mom was deported. One of our cooks who had also been detained was deported almost immediately. My siblings and I had to take over the restaurant. In revenue alone, we lost at least $3,000 during the days we were closed. During the period of having to open reduced hours, closing at 5 p.m. instead of 9 p.m., we likely lost half of our normal revenue for those days. And beyond that, business has dropped because people were and continue to be afraid to leave their homes. I cannot begin to comprehend the economic impact of the surge on my community. It's important that we fully understand the damage. Please support an academic and economic impact study. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we will move on to Rachel Sayre. Thank you. If you'll state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Claiborne, Chair Nash, and committee members. My name is Rachel Sayre. I am the Director of Emergency Management for the City of Minneapolis. Since early December, my office has been responding to a range of emergency needs across the City of Minneapolis. We work across sectors and with stakeholders to respond to immediate needs in our community. Last month, we released a preliminary impact assessment examining the impacts of Operation Metro Surge across 4 key sectors of food, shelter, livelihoods, and mental health. The impact assessment found 76,000 residents just in the city of Minneapolis in immediate need of food assistance, $47 million in lost wages for people who were afraid to leave their homes to go to work, $81 million in lost revenue for small businesses, nearly $5 million in lost revenue due to hotel cancellations through the summer, and $15.7 million in rental assistance needs. This is a point-in-time assessment for 1 month in my city alone. These communicate the scale and scope of impact. We know that urgent needs continue and will continue for several months, and once we are past urgent needs, we will be looking at months and years of recovery. As we all know, there are no lines between living in Minneapolis and working, dining, or shopping in any other city in Minnesota. A statewide assessment of the impacts of Operation Metro Surge is critical for all of us, wherever we live and work, so that we have a statewide view of impacts, so that we know what resources are needed to recover, and so that we can plan together on how to recover as a whole. Thank you to Representative Howard for bringing this bill forward, and thank you to the committee for giving me the opportunity to share our support today.
Thank you very much. And we will move to member discussion on the bill as amended. Representative Kosnick, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Chair Howard, how would we determine the entity to do this study? In line 1.7, it says a nonpartisan entity. How would we determine what entity would provide this?
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Chair Cleavorn. Thank you, Representative Koznick. The Office of Minnesota Management Budget would solicit proposals with nonpartisan entities, so they would make the determination. We were purposeful in putting nonpartisan entity into the language because we think an independent economic analysis is warranted. There are a host of, for-profit entities that do this kind of complex economic analysis. And, really trusted folks, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve is another entity. And so I feel confident based on track record, we could get a good group of folks to provide and do the analysis.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you. I appreciate what's in the language. I think practicality, I have big doubts that it would be a nonpartisan entity. Even the Federal Reserve has partisanship within it. But the other concern I have to the committee is spending another $500,000 to have a study. I think there are other entities that probably may research this on their own anyways. They will probably be partisan on either side, or maybe some less partisan. Think tanks will look into this anyways. Representative Howard, once you get the study, a $500,000 study, then what?
Representative Howard, and I'm going to ask that we keep questions tight because we have a very full agenda today. Please go ahead.
Chair Cleavorn, Representative Koznick, as is often the case, that gives us as the legislature more complete, full information to better legislate, to better respond to the needs in the short term, long term for our state.
Thank you very much. Quick follow-up?
Yeah, just to close it out from my perspective. So I'm not going to support this. We're going to spend $500,000 on a study that I think the impact would be questionable from either side of the aisle, depending on who did it. But then it's going to lead to probably some bill that says we need $100 million, or we heard from the city of Minneapolis of their own impact study that they did on their own, not $500,000. But then we're going to have a bill put before us for $100 million, $200 million, maybe $1 billion, whatever amount that some author might want. And then we're going to be down the same road of the promise grants that we just saw this week, where very questionable grants being handed out to people that aren't even in business anymore or have business licenses. So I think this is just heading us down the road, wasting $500,000 to eventually waste more money on more fraud-ridden programs, and I don't think that's the route that Minnesotans want us to go.
Thank you, Representative Koznick. I know that there are 24 suburban mayors who are very interested in this data. Representative Bonner.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to that point, I am one of those suburban districts. And I will tell you, the impact to my suburban community has been significant. We have folks who can't open their businesses at all, who've completely lost their revenue. We have folks where we have businesses where the owner is now manning the grill because even though his employees are legal U.S. residents, they're too afraid to come into work. We have folks who are, if you've been through the businesses in my community, sometimes they look like a ghost town lately. They have for some time. And just for context, my suburban community is the 7th fastest growing city in the entire state of Minnesota. We have the 2nd largest amount of retail in the entire state. And we have, if you ask my mayor, the largest number of restaurants in the entire state. So what happens in my businesses, in my local businesses, has a direct impact not only on our city, but on our local businesses, on our taxpayers. My community is deeply concerned about these economic impacts because that impacts the revenues generated by my city, the ability for us to fill out our own budget and pay for all the nice things that we have. And that makes a big, big difference. So, and it's very significant for us. So I would just suggest that, I feel like in this case, we have a lot of mayors, and not just Minneapolis and St. Paul, that are very interested in understanding what those economic impacts are and how we address those concerns moving forward. And so I want to thank you, Representative Howard, for bringing the bill forward.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I'm trying to understand, because a big portion of the contributing factors to what happened, I would assume that this group is going to look at the majority of the states that didn't have the activities and costs incurred, didn't have the violent mobs, and what did our state and local officials do differently than these other states? You know, was part of this cost because law enforcement wasn't allowed? In fact, there's evidence of recalling and telling officers not to respond to incidents. I've seen video on the TV of mobs tearing into and damaging a hotel, and law enforcement standing by and, you know, doing nothing. Is the bill as structured going to look at what should the state and the officials have done to not have the problems that made Minnesota an outlier in this country? Is that part of your bill?
Very briefly, Representative Howard.
Chair Cleavorn, this is an economic impact study. I would welcome an expansion and more of maybe a January 6th style, take a full picture look, but this is focused on economic impact study. But, you know, given kind of outlandish framing like that, maybe more study is warranted.
Okay. We're not going to use
Madam
words.
Chair?
We're not going to use words like outlandish. That's not respectful to the members of our committee. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, because honestly, if we're looking at and addressing, we need to understand the factors, because that would also help us understand where were the causes of the costs. I'm aware, with talking with sheriffs in my area over the years, that response time highly impacts not just the possible costs or damage, but the prevention of escalation to a point of where things get out of hand. So yeah, I'm just disappointed that we're not looking at the real factors so that in the future we don't incur these situations. Plus, if you're looking at the costs, to not look at the causes and proportional responsibilities of the costs incurred is, I think, lacking a true study. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Vice Chair Davis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you had mentioned that this is in the best interests for our constituents across the state. You're taking $500,000 to do an economic study, impact study on federal law enforcement trying to do their job in our communities when we have local officials encouraging people to put their bodies on the line to impede federal law enforcement when they're just trying to do their job. In fact, we even know that there's manuals being passed out and even a confession of a state rep saying that they took part in these manuals and distributing these manuals, teaching them how to impede ICE, not just observe them or record them. Actually, I've seen the video, actually impede them. You want to do an economic impact study on law enforcement being impeded and how that affect our local communities. I'm going to tell you, people across this state, you want to know what they would like to have an economic impact study on? The fraud that's going on in our state. Here you're bringing forth a bill that's going to spend $500,000 of the taxpayers' money when they're wondering where their billions and billions of dollars have gone in fraud. And you talked about childcare centers being shut down. Yeah, I know a lot about that because across the state in rural Minnesota, the state comes in and they're very good at inspecting and shutting down daycare centers. But down in the metro area, daycare centers that aren't even real daycare centers are allowed to thrive and take millions and millions of dollars of our taxpayer money. So that's what I would like to see an economic impact study on, Representative Howard. And I would hope that you would join us in that effort to actually focus on something that's going to actually help us statewide, shutting down the fraud in our state that has gone on for years and for far too long and cost taxpayers billions of dollars when they are struggling just to pay their property taxes. I would highly encourage us to vote no on this bill, get rid of this legislation that isn't going to do anything or go anywhere, and actually help Minnesotans.
Thank you. I didn't hear a question in there. Chair. Thank you, Chair Nash.
Madam Chair, I believe you skipped over Representative Joy, who had sought recognition.
Oh, apologies for that. I will ask you, Chair Nash, if you would be willing to allow, since you want all of your members, every one of them to speak on every bill. One moment, please. Would you be willing to allow us to meet this evening?
Madam Chair, no.
Okay, then we're going to limit conversation. We put a very tight timeline on today's agenda. Do you have any closing comments to this?
Representative Joy.
I'm not going to recognize Representative.
Okay,
Joy.
well, first we're going to seek a roll
Again,
call.
the state of Minnesota
Thank you
Since
for.
we're not going to
Madam
recognize.
Chair, you're going to
has
shut down
decided
a
to
voice.
limit.
Got it.
This is just like the tax bill they had on the floor.
Chair Cleveborn.
This is not representation.
Excuse me,
Chair.
one moment.
You
One
have
moment,
not.
please.
This is the chair again.
Excuse me.
Silencing this side of the
Representative
aisle.
Howard, do you have any closing comments
This is
to
the
the
chair
bill as
again,
amended?
silencing this side of the aisle.
Representative Howard, you have the floor.
We should do studies like this on the George Floyd
Thank you,
effect
Chair.
when Governor
Representative
Walz
Howard,
Thank you, Chair
did
Cleveland.
not dispatch the guard.
Please continue.
Let's see what that study
Representative
was.
Howard.
Chair Cleveland, I would like to just offer a brief closing statement. And it is to share one additional story shortly from my constituents in Minnesota. And I want you to put yourself in this room. On an early morning in January, a family of four living in an apartment, two parents with a son and a daughter, here legally with legal status, no criminal record. In that morning, ICE agents found their way into the apartment building without a federal warrant. The word got out, and it was a very chaotic situation. In the chaotic situation, ICE agents detained and took the mother and took the daughter. This happened in the morning, and by that evening, the mother and the daughter were already in Texas. The father, who was the sole economic breadwinner, was faced with a choice: am I going to work, or I'm going to stay home with my kid? And I want you to imagine that son crying, pleading with that father to not leave because he doesn't want to lose his father. And I want you to put yourself in that room and tell me what you would do. Would you look that father in the eye and say you're going to help, or would you look away? And really, that's your choice with this bill. And all we're asking you to do is be curious, to want to learn more information. That's the first step. If we can do that, we can have more information and to be a legislature that can take action on our constituents and just maybe learn from the axiom that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I encourage a yes vote.
Thank
And
you.
Madam Chair, are you going to recognize me now?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'm going to say that not allowing a member to speak as a member of this committee with an election certificate who has a valid question is pretty outrageous, and that is not something that I think you want to create a reputation for doing. So I do have some questions of the author. My question is from a methodological perspective. If anyone's ever done a survey or done deep research, you would outline what that methodology is. There's no conversation about methodology here, about things like what are the impacts, I think as Representative Davis alluded to, around some of the counter-protesters who created a disruption of their own and had an economic impact. That's not referenced in your bill at all. So I have concerns about that. And I find it refreshing, members and Madam Chair, that you have a sudden, deep, and abiding love for small business when you didn't seem to have either a deep or abiding love for the impact of paid family medical leave on what small businesses are going to go through and are now going through with the impact of that was foisted upon the state of Minnesota. You know, it always concerns me when we're basing a bill off of, and to quote the author, a bevy of anecdotal information. Anecdotal information is worrisome at best, so I find that that's quite troubling. But once again, Madam Chair, I'm going to encourage you to not skip over our members. They have a voice, and when I'm done, I'll be happy to hear your comments. But just because this is DFL election fodder day that you want to come and bring some of these bills forward doesn't require us to vote them out. And indignation around that is fine if you'd like that. But you know, there's no fiscal note or there's direct appropriation. We have not received targets at all. We don't know what we're going to be spending on anything. So as I had previously stated, I request a roll call, and Chair Nash votes no.
Thank you. A roll call has been requested. I will ask the legislative assistant to please take the roll. The chair votes aye.
Chair Cleaborn, aye. Representative Nash?
No.
Representative Nash, no. Representative Bonner?
Aye.
Representative Bonner, aye. Representative Davis?
No.
Representative Davis, no. Representative Anderson?
Anderson, no.
Representative Anderson, no. Representative Clardy?
Aye.
Representative Clardy, aye. Representative Freiberg?
Yes.
Representative Freiberg, yes. Representative Jones? Excused. Representative Jones excused. Representative Joy?
Definitely no, since I was silenced in this committee.
Representative Joy, no. Representative Koznick?
No.
Representative Koznick, no. Representative Kraft?
Aye.
Representative Kraft, aye. Representative Nikolai?
Aye.
Representative Nikolai, aye. Representative Quam?
Yet.
Representative Quam, no. Representative Sexton?
No.
Representative Sexton, no.
Thank you. With a vote of 6 ayes, 7 nays, the motion does not prevail and the bill is not re-referred to Ways and Means.